CEO discovers surprising truth after twins call him Dad. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Boston sparkled with champagne flutes and forced laughter. David Clarke stood at the podium, his tailored Tom Ford suit as impeccable as his rehearsed speech about corporate responsibility. The annual Clarke Foundation Charity Gala was his company's crown jewel of public relations, a necessary evil that painted him as Boston's most philanthropic CEO rather than its most ruthless. And so, we at Clarke Enterprises believe in investing in our community's future, he concluded, his deep voice carrying across the room with practiced authority. The audience of Boston's elite responded with polite applause, exactly as choreographed. David allowed himself a small smile, not warm enough to seem genuine, but sufficient to maintain his careful image. As he stepped away from the podium, his assistant Rebecca materialized at his side, tablet in hand. The donation numbers are already exceeding last year's. Mr. Clarke, the press is eating it up. Good. David checked his Patek Philippe watch. How much longer do I need to stay? The children from St. Mary's Orphanage are about to perform their thank you song. After that, you can... Dad! The word cut through the murmur of conversation like a thunderclap. David turned, more irritated than curious, to find two small boys pushing through the crowd. They were identical down to their slightly rumpled dress shirts and wild brown hair, their faces flushed with excitement. "Dad!" they called again in perfect unison. And this time David realized with growing horror that they were running straight toward him. The ballroom fell silent. Rebecca's tablet clattered to the floor. The boys reached David and wrapped their arms around his legs, their grins wide and hopeful. David stood frozen, his hands hovering uselessly at his sides as whispers rippled through the crowd. There must be some mistake, he managed, looking desperately around the room. His eyes landed on a woman pushing through the crowd, her face pale with panic. She wore a simple black cocktail dress that marked her as hotel staff rather than a guest, and her dark hair was coming loose from its careful twist. "Ethan, Noah," she called, her voice trembling. "Come here right now." The boys clung tighter to David's legs. "But Mom, you said—" one of them began. And now the woman reached them and grabbed their shoulders, trying to pull them away. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Clarke. They shouldn't be here. They're supposed to be in the staff room." David stared at her face, something nagging at the edge of his memory. "Do I know you?" She wouldn't meet his eyes. "No, sir. I used to work in accounting at Clarke Enterprises, but that was years ago. I'm Amelia Miller." The name meant nothing to him, but the room had grown unbearably quiet. Every socialite and reporter was watching the scene unfold with predatory interest. David felt his carefully constructed image cracking. "My office," he said through clenched teeth. "Now!" Rebecca sprang into action, herding them toward a side door as David forced a smile for his guests. "Please, enjoy the entertainment. I have a small matter to attend to." The walk to the hotel's business center was silent, except for the boys' excited whispers. David's mind raced through possibilities, each more concerning than the last. A scam, a publicity stunt. But the woman, Amelia, looked too terrified for this to be planned. Inside the empty office, David turned on her. "Explain." Amelia pulled the boys close to her sides. "I never meant for this to happen. They weren't supposed to be here tonight, but they saw your picture on the event poster, and they've always wondered." She swallowed hard. "Do you remember the Christmas party 8 years ago?" David's stomach dropped. He remembered very little from that period. It had been the year of Clarke Enterprises' biggest expansion, endless meetings and late nights, and the Christmas party, too much scotch. A quiet accountant with knowing eyes who listened to him talk about his dreams for the company. The storage closet, the way she'd slipped away afterward, and he'd been too busy to think about it again. He looked at the boys, really looked at them for the first time. They had his nose, his chin, his mother's eyes. "No," he said, taking a step back. "This is impossible. I tried to tell you." Amelia whispered. I tried so many times. One of the boys, Ethan or Noah, he couldn't tell which, reached for his hand. David jerked away as if burned, and the hope in the child's eyes dimmed. There will be a DNA test, he said coldly. And if this is some kind of scheme, I'll make sure you never work in Boston again. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, but she lifted her chin. Do whatever you need to do, Mr. Clark, but these are your sons, and they deserve better than the father I've always feared you'd be. She gathered the boys close and hurried from the room, leaving David alone with the wreckage of his perfectly ordered world. Through the wall, he could hear the orphans beginning their song, their sweet voices singing about hope and second chances. David sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone to call his lawyer. In the pocket of his perfect suit, the speech about investing in the future crinkled like autumn leaves. David's penthouse office on the 40th floor of Clark Tower had always been his sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Boston Harbor, the water dark and choppy under the grey morning sky. He hadn't slept since the gala, and the city's usual beauty was lost on him as he paced the length of his desk. I want everything you can find on Amelia Miller, he barked into his phone. Employment records, current address, financial status, everything. Already on it? His lawyer, Richard Bennett, replied. The DNA testing facility can see you at 2 this afternoon. I've also drafted a non-disclosure agreement for Miss Miller to sign. Good. David paused at the window, watching a seagull ride the wind currents. And Richard, keep this quiet. The last thing I need is... His office door burst open. Rebecca rushed in, her face flushed. Mr. Clark, I'm so sorry, but you need to see this. She thrust her tablet at him. On the screen, a grainy photo showed the twins hugging his legs at the gala, his face a mask of shock above them. The headline read, Boston's Ice King melts. Clark Enterprises CEO confronted by secret family at charity event. The seagull disappeared into the distance as David's fingers tightened on the tablet. How many outlets? It's everywhere, Rebecca whispered. Social media is exploding. The board is demanding an emergency meeting at noon. David set the tablet down with deliberate care. Richard, change of plans. Get that DNA test moved up. I don't care what it costs. He ended the call and turned to Rebecca. Pull every file we have from 8 years ago. Personnel records, Christmas party attendance lists, security footage if it still exists. Sir, Rebecca hesitated. About Ms. Miller, she did try to contact you several times. David's head snapped up. What? It was before my time, but I found messages in the archived correspondence, letters, emails, even a visit to the office. Rebecca's voice grew smaller. Your previous assistant, Patricia Walsh, marked them all as potential security threats and blocked them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. David remembered Patricia, efficient, protective, retired now to Florida with a generous pension. She'd handled all his personal matters during the company's expansion phase, keeping his life running smoothly while he focused on building his empire. Keeping his life running smoothly by making decisions about his children without his knowledge. The crystal whiskey decanter on his desk shattered against the wall before David even realized he'd thrown it. Rebecca jumped. Get out, he said quietly, and cancel my morning meetings, all of them, except the board. Alone in his office, David pulled up the company's archived personnel files. Amelia Miller's employee photo stared back at him from 8 years ago, younger, her smile more confident, her hair loose around her shoulders. He remembered that hair spread across his desk in the storage closet, remembered running his fingers through it as He slammed the laptop shut and pressed his forehead against the cool glass window. Below, Boston carried on, oblivious to his world falling apart. A pair of boys chased each other through Post Office Square Park, their laughter silent, through 40 stories of glass and steel. 8 years. 8 years of birthdays and first days of school and nightmares and skinned knees. 8 years of Amelia working multiple jobs. Her employment history showed a string of positions, each barely overlapping the last, to support his sons while he collected sports cars and vacation homes. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard. DNA testing in 45 minutes. Car waiting downstairs. David grabbed his coat, then stopped at his private bathroom to splash water on his face. In the mirror, his reflection looked foreign. Hair disheveled, tie slightly crooked, the perfect facade cracking. For a moment, he saw his own father staring back at him, remembered the cold eyes and disappointed frown that had shaped his childhood. "I'm nothing like him," David told his reflection, but the words rang hollow in the marble bathroom. The elevator ride to the lobby was interminable. His phone continuously buzzed with messages from board members, reporters, and society acquaintances, suddenly remembering they'd seen him with a pretty brunette at that Christmas party years ago. He ignored them all. In the lobby, he nearly collided with a young woman juggling an infant and a coffee cup. "Sorry," she smiled, shifting the baby to her hip. The child reached for David's tie with chubby fingers, and he flinched away. Outside, his driver held the car door open. "The testing facility, sir?" David nodded, then froze. Through the tinted windows of his Maybach, he spotted them across the street, Amelia and the twins, walking past his building. She wore a waitress uniform now, the boys in matching school backpacks. One of them pointed up at Clark Tower, while the other tugged on Amelia's hand, talking animatedly. For a moment, David considered calling out to them. The DNA test results wouldn't change what he already knew in his gut. Those were his eyes looking up at his building, his mother's chin split between two small faces. Instead, he sank into the leather seat and closed the door. "Drive," he ordered. As the car pulled away, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window glass, a successful man in an expensive suit, alone in the back of a luxury car, running away from the mess he'd created 8 years ago, just like his father would have done. The DNA results arrived via courier 3 days later, though David hadn't needed them to confirm what his reflection had been telling him all week. Every mirror, every window, every polished surface in his carefully curated world seemed to throw his own features back at him, split between two small faces. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. Richard read from the report in David's study. Outside, rain pelted the penthouse windows, turning Boston into a watercolor of greys and blacks. "Mrs. Miller has agreed to meet this afternoon to discuss arrangements." David swirled the sparkling water in his glass, missing the familiar burn of scotch. "Arrangements? Support payments, visitation schedules, legal recognition of paternity." Richard adjusted his glasses. Given the public nature of the revelation, a formal acknowledgement would help control the narrative. The board meeting had been brutal, while Clark Enterprises stock had weathered the scandal surprisingly well. Apparently, secret love children made Boston's most notorious businessman seem more human. The whispers and sideways glances from his executives had been harder to stomach. "What's she asking for?" "That's the thing," Richard said, frowning at his notes. "She's not asking for anything. No demands for back support, no threats of going to the media. She simply wants to establish a visitation schedule that won't disrupt the boys' routine." David set down his glass. "Their routine: school on weekdays, swimming lessons on Tuesdays, art class for Ethan on Thursdays, baseball for Noah on Saturdays." Richard's frown deepened. They seemed to be very well-adjusted children, despite their mother working 3 jobs to support them while I built my empire. The bitterness in David's voice surprised even him. A discreet knock interrupted them. Rebecca entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Miller and the boys are here." David's chest tightened. "I thought we were meeting at her apartment. There was an incident at their building, a burst pipe. She apologizes for the change of venue." Rebecca hesitated. "The boys brought something to show you." The study door opened wider, and there they were. The twins wore matching red raincoats, their hair damp from the storm. Amelia stood behind them, her own coat shabby but carefully mended, her face a mask of composure that reminded David of his own boardroom expression. "Hello, Mr. Clark," she said formally. "I hope we're not interrupting." Before David could respond, one of the boys, Noah, he guessed from the more confident stance, thrust a folder forward. "We made this for you." David took the folder automatically. Inside were two drawings, one a careful study of Clark Tower rendered in colored pencil, the other a dynamic scene of a baseball game with figures wearing impossibly bright uniforms. "I did the building," Ethan said quietly, half hiding behind his brother. "Noah did the baseball one. Mom says you own the Red Sox." "A minority stake," David corrected absently, studying the tower drawing. The attention to detail was remarkable for an 8-year-old. Even the revolving door at the base was perfectly proportioned. "Ethan loves architecture," Amelia offered. "He checks out books from the library about famous buildings. And Noah—" "I'm gonna play for the Red Sox," Noah announced. "Or maybe be CEO like you. Which makes more money?" "Noah," Amelia warned, but David found himself almost smiling. "Being CEO requires a lot of math," he told the boy. "Do you like math?" Noah's nose wrinkled. "Ethan's better at math, but I'm better at running fast and hitting home runs." Richard cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss the legal matters." "Actually," David heard himself say, "I was about to have lunch brought up. Would you all like to join me?" The surprise on Amelia's face mirrored his own internal shock at the invitation. The boys, however, lit up with enthusiasm. "Can we see your office?" Ethan asked, his shyness momentarily forgotten. "Do you have a helicopter pad on the roof?" Noah added. "Boys," Amelia started, but David interrupted. "The office is just down the hall, and yes, there's a helipad, though it's not suitable in this weather." Rebecca materialized with perfect timing. "Shall I order from Salvatore's? I believe they still make those meatball heroes you used to like." "Ms. Miller." A faint blush colored Amelia's cheeks. "You remember? You used to bring them back for the whole accounting department," Rebecca said. Before an awkward silence fell, David looked between Rebecca and Amelia, wondering how many other details of those days he had missed, too focused on spreadsheets and acquisitions to notice the lives around him. "Meatball heroes sound perfect," he said. And perhaps Rebecca could show the boys the model of Clark Tower in the conference room while we talk. The twins followed Rebecca eagerly, peppering her with questions about the building's height and whether anyone had ever bungee jumped from the top, a question David made a mental note to discuss with security. As their voices faded down the hall, he turned to find Amelia studying him with an unreadable expression. "They're remarkable children," he said quietly. "Yes," she agreed. "No thanks to—" She stopped herself, squaring her shoulders. "I mean, yes, they are." Richard began spreading papers across David's desk, but David held up a hand. "Give us a moment." Once they were alone, David walked to the window. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, and patches of blue were appearing between the clouds. Below, the city was emerging from its grey cocoon, life returning to the streets. "Oh, dear, I should have tried harder to reach you," Amelia said suddenly. "Not just through the office. I should have—" "No," David turned to face her. "I should have seen you, really seen you, not just—" He gestured vaguely at the space between them, remembering that long-ago storage closet. "I want to do better. For them, I just don't know how." A small smile touched Amelia's lips. "Well, meatball heroes are a good start." From down the hall came the sound of children's laughter, his children's laughter, and for the first time in days, David felt something inside him begin to thaw. The executive boardroom of Clark Enterprises had hosted countless high-stakes negotiations, but none quite like this. David sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the small boy perched on either side of him, both intensely focused on their homework. "So, if Train A leaves Chicago at 60 miles per hour, Noah's face scrunched in concentration as he studied his math worksheet. "And Train B leaves Detroit at 75 miles per hour, Ethan added, already sketching a diagram. David checked his watch. The quarterly earnings call would begin in 20 minutes, and his CFO had been hovering outside the glass walls for the past 5 months, clearly agitated by the unprecedented scene within. "Think about it like this," David said, pulling a blank sheet of paper from his leather portfolio. Let's map out the distance between the cities first." It had been 2 weeks since the DNA results, and this impromptu after-school study session wasn't part of the carefully negotiated visitation schedule. But when Amelia's shift at the diner had run long and her usual sitter called in sick, David had found himself offering his office as a temporary solution. "Mr. Clark," his assistant's voice came through the intercom, "the board members are assembling for the call." 5 minutes, he replied, helping Noah plot the train's trajectories. He could feel the weight of disapproving stares through the glass, but for once, the opinion of his board members seemed less important than the look of triumph on Noah's face as understanding dawned. "They meet in 3.5 hours, Noah announced proudly. "Up in Indiana," Ethan added, his own diagram more detailed, including tiny sketches of the trains and a compass rose in the corner. The boardroom door opened, and Rebecca entered with Amelia close behind. "I'm so sorry," Amelia began, still in her diner uniform. "The replacement waitress was late, and then the bus." "Mom!" Both boys jumped up, papers flying. "Dad helped us with our math homework." The word "Dad" hung in the air, electric. It was the first time they'd called him that since the gala, and David felt something shift in his chest, like a key turning in a long rusted lock. Amelia's eyes met his, a mix of concern and something softer. That's wonderful, but I'm sure your father has important business to attend to." "The earnings call," Rebecca reminded gently. David stood, straightening his tie. "Right. Boys, excellent work on the train problem. Perhaps next time we can tackle geometry. Can we come back tomorrow?" Noah asked eagerly. "Tomorrow I have a meeting in New York," David said, then watched their faces fall. "But I could move it to video conference." His CFO, visible through the glass, threw his hands up in exasperation. "We couldn't impose," Amelia started, but David cut her off. "It's no imposition. The boys can use the conference room next door. It has an excellent view of the harbor. And I believe there's a cart of snacks that usually serves our board members." "The imported cookies from Milan?" Rebecca asked, her lips twitching. "Those would be acceptable," David said gravely, and was rewarded with twin grins from his sons. As Amelia helped the boys gather their scattered papers, David noticed Ethan hanging back, clutching something to his chest. "What's that?" he asked, shyly. Ethan held out a drawing. It showed the boardroom they were standing in, rendered with his usual attention to detail, but with one significant addition. The 3 figures at the table were smiling, homework spread between them, a scene of perfect contentment captured in colored pencil. "It's for your wall," Ethan mumbled. "I saw you have lots of fancy paintings, but this is better than any of them," David said firmly, already reaching for a pin from his desk drawer. He affixed the drawing to the wall directly behind his chair, where it would be visible during video calls with his most important clients. His CFO looked like he might faint. "David," Amelia said softly, "are you sure that's—" "Perfect placement," he interrupted, "though the artist might need to sign it." Ethan beamed and carefully added his signature to the corner, while Noah demanded equal representation on the wall. "I'll draw you hitting a home run," he promised, looking forward to it. David checked his watch again. "Now, I really do need to tell our shareholders how the quarter went. But tomorrow." "Tomorrow," the boys agreed in unison. As they filed out, David caught a glimpse of his reflection in the boardroom's glass wall. His tie was slightly crooked, there was a smudge of pencil on his French cuff, and his usual stern expression had been replaced by something dangerously close to a smile. He looked nothing like the CEO whose portrait hung in the lobby. He looked, he realized with a start, happy. "Sir." Rebecca appeared at his elbow with the earnings report. "See, they're waiting." David took one last look at Ethan's drawing, at the three smiling figures sharing space in his carefully ordered world. Then he squared his shoulders, straightened his tie, and prepared to face his board. But even as he recited profit margins and market projections, his mind kept drifting to train problems and colored pencils, to the way Ethan's eyes lit up when he solved a puzzle, to Noah's determined face as he worked through the math. For the first time in his career, David Clark found himself watching the clock during an earnings call, not because he was busy, but because somewhere in Boston, two little boys were wondering if their father would keep his promise about tomorrow. And for the first time in his life, he intended to. The emergency board meeting was called on a Thursday afternoon, the same day Ethan had his art class. David found himself checking his watch repeatedly as Vernon Matthews, his longest-serving board member, paced the length of the conference room. "This isn't like you, David," Vernon said, his bow tie askew with agitation. "The Morgan merger requires your complete attention. Instead, you're leaving crucial meetings early, rescheduling calls, and there's a child's drawing hanging in your boardroom. 2 drawings now," David corrected mildly, glancing at Noah's latest contribution, a dynamic baseball scene featuring what appeared to be David hitting a home run while wearing a business suit. "And the Morgan merger is proceeding exactly as planned." "Is it?" Vernon slapped a folder onto the table. Because our sources say they're entertaining a competing offer from Rochester Corp, the same meeting you left early last week to attend a children's baseball game." David's jaw tightened. He had promised Noah he would watch him pitch, and the joy on his son's face when he'd spotted David in the stands had been worth more than any merger. But now, his phone buzzed, a text from Amelia. "Ethan asking if you're still coming to his art show tonight. No pressure if you're busy." "The Morgan family values tradition," Vernon continued. "They want to merge with Clark Enterprises because of our reputation for unwavering focus and dedication. If they sense that you're becoming distracted—" "I need to make a call," David interrupted, standing. "Give me the room." Once alone, he dialed Amelia's number. She answered on the first ring. "David, everything okay?" He pressed his forehead against the cool glass window. There's a situation with the merger. I might not make it to Ethan's show." The silence on the other end felt heavy. "I see," Amelia said finally. "Should I tell him you're sorry?" "No," David said quickly. "Let me talk to him." There was a rustling sound, then Ethan's quiet voice. "Dad?" David closed his eyes. A month ago, he would have dismissed the art show without a second thought. Business came first. It always had. But now— "Ooh, Ethan, remember how you explained perspective drawing to me? How the lines all have to meet at the right point?" "Yes," Ethan said. "It's called the vanishing point. Well, I'm dealing with something similar in my work right now. All these different lines that need to come together perfectly." David took a deep breath. "But I promise you, I will be there tonight. I might be a little late, but I will see your artwork." "Really?" The hope in Ethan's voice made David's chest ache. "Even though you have important business stuff." "You're important too," David said firmly. "Now, put your mother back on." When Amelia came back on the line, her voice was guarded. "David, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He turned to face the boardroom, where Vernon was waiting impatiently. "What time does the show start?" 7 o'clock at the community center. "But David, if this merger is at risk—" "I'll handle it." He straightened his tie. "Oh, and Amelia, thank you." "For what?" "For raising sons who make me want to be better than I am." He ended the call and strode back into the boardroom. Vernon raised an eyebrow. "Everything sorted?" "No," David said, sitting down. "But it will be. Call Morgan. Set up a dinner for 6 o'clock. Tonight, but their schedule. Tell them I'm making time specifically for them at Bruno's." And Vernon. David pulled up the merger documents on his laptop. "Make it clear that if they want to talk about tradition and family values, they should know that Clark Enterprises is evolving. We're not just building a business anymore. We're building a legacy. Vernon's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. The competing offer. You knew about it. Of course I knew. I also know that Rochester Corp's financials are shaky and the Morgans are too smart to seriously consider them. David allowed himself a small smile. They're testing us, Vernon. Testing me, and tonight I'm going to show them exactly what kind of company we're becoming. The next few hours were a blur of negotiations and strategy sessions. At 5:55, David's private elevator descended to the garage where his driver was waiting. The dinner with the Morgans was executed with military precision. Wine poured, terms discussed, handshakes exchanged. By 7:45, David was sliding into the back row of the community center's multi-purpose room. Still in his business suit, but wearing the bright blue tie Ethan had picked out for him last weekend. The art show was already underway. Parents clustered around display boards showing their children's work. David spotted Amelia near the front. Elegant despite her obvious exhaustion from a double shift at the diner, Noah was beside her, unusually still as he stared at his twin's artwork. Ethan stood by his display, shoulders hunched slightly as he explained his drawings to an elderly art teacher. Then he looked up, scanned the room, and saw David. The smile that broke across his face was worth more than any merger. David made his way forward, nodding to other parents who did double takes at seeing Boston's most notorious CEO at a children's art show. Ethan's display featured a series of architectural drawings: the public library, Trinity Church, and in the center, Clark Tower. But this version of the tower was different from his earlier drawings. Instead of the stark corporate monolith, Ethan had added splashes of warm colors and life, flowers in window boxes, a rooftop garden, and tiny figures visible through the windows, all working together. "It's how I think the building could be," Ethan explained shyly. "More friendly." David studied the drawing, seeing his life's work through his son's eyes. "It's perfect," he said. "In fact," he pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. Would you mind if I shared this with our architectural team? We have some renovations planned, and I think they could learn something from your perspective." Ethan's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" David put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Now, tell me about your other drawings. I want to hear everything." As Ethan launched into an enthusiastic explanation of vanishing points and color theory, David caught Amelia's eye. She was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. Part pride, part fear, part something else entirely. He had missed 8 years of moments like this. But standing there, listening to his son talk about art, while his other son made increasingly dramatic yawning noises nearby, David made a silent promise. He wouldn't miss another one. The Morgan merger could wait until tomorrow. Tonight was for vanishing points and perspective, and not just the kind you could draw on paper. The storm hit Boston without warning, sheets of rain turning the morning commute into chaos. David sat in his home office, watching lightning illuminate the harbor while on a video call with his London team. The Morgan merger was entering its final phase, requiring round-the-clock coordination across time zones. "The timing is critical," his UK director emphasized. "If we don't file the paperwork by noon, London time tomorrow." David's phone lit up with Amelia's number. He never ignored her calls now. "One moment," he told the screen full of executives, and answered, "Amelia?" Her voice was tight with panic. "Noah's hurt." The world stopped. What happened? He was at baseball practice. The storm. They were trying to get inside, and he slipped on the wet bleachers. "They're taking him to Mass General now." David was already moving, grabbing his coat. "How bad?" "They think his arm might be broken. He's scared, David. He keeps asking for you." Through the phone, he heard Noah's voice in the background, tight with pain. "Is that Dad?" "I'm on my way," David said, then turned back to his laptop. "Emergency situation. Rebecca will reschedule." The London team erupted in protests. "David, we've been working toward this for months." "My son is in the hospital." The words felt strange and powerful on his tongue. "Everything else can wait." He ended the call over their objections and rushed to the elevator. In the lobby, he almost collided with Vernon, who was arriving for their morning strategy session. "David, the London team just called me in a panic. What's going on?" "Noah's hurt. Baseball accident." Vernon's face darkened. "David, listen to me. You've been indulging in this family situation, and the board has been patient, but this merger—" "Patient?" David stopped so abruptly that Vernon stumbled back. "My children aren't a situation to be indulged, Vernon. They're my sons. And Clark Enterprises is your life's work. Everything you've built could collapse if— Then let it collapse." The words rang through the marble lobby, shocking them both. David's phone buzzed again, Amelia updating him on which entrance to use at the hospital. "If you walk away now," Vernon called after him, "the board will be forced to take action." David didn't look back. His driver had the car waiting, and they pushed through the storm-snarled traffic with hazards flashing. David's phone continued to light up with messages from London, from the board, from lawyers warning of the merger's imminent collapse. He ignored them all, focusing instead on a photo on his phone. Noah at last week's game, grinning from the pitcher's mound, victory shining in his eyes. In the background, Ethan sat in the stands, sketching his brother's perfect pitching form while Amelia. The thought of her hit him with unexpected force. She'd been handling everything alone for 8 years, every scraped knee, every fever, every crisis, big and small. The weight of that responsibility suddenly felt crushing. The hospital emergency room was controlled chaos. David spotted Amelia immediately, still in her diner uniform, her hair escaping its neat bun. Ethan sat beside her, unusually still, his sketchbook untouched in his lap. "Where is he?" David demanded. "Getting X-rays." Amelia's composure cracked slightly. "They said his pitching arm—" "Dad!" Noah's voice called from down the hall. They turned to see him being wheeled back from radiology, his right arm immobilized, his face pale but brightening at the sight of David. "Hey, slugger!" David reached for his son's good hand. "Heard you had a disagreement with some bleachers. The doctor said I might not be able to pitch in the championship game." Noah's voice wavered. "Everything's ruined." "Nothing's ruined," David said firmly, following as they wheeled Noah into an examination room. "We'll get you the best physical therapy, the best trainers, whatever you need. Promise." "Promise." David squeezed his hand, then turned to the doctor entering the room. "I want a complete evaluation. Spare no expense." The doctor raised an eyebrow at Amelia, who flushed. "Mr. Clark, I should mention the insurance." "I'll handle everything," David cut in. "Just help my son." Hours passed in a blur of X-rays, consultations, and forms. David signed everything without looking at the costs, his focus entirely on Noah's face, as the doctor explained the break wasn't as bad as feared. With proper care, he'd be back on the mound by spring. "But the championship," Noah protested weakly. "Hey!" David sat on the edge of the hospital bed. "You know what makes a real champion? Not giving up. We'll work on your left-handed throw while your right arm heals. You'll come back stronger." "Really?" "You'll help me practice." "Every day," David promised, and meant it with a certainty that surprised him. His phone buzzed yet again. Vernon, warning that the London market was about to open, that the merger was imploding, that his absence was being noted by major shareholders. David turned off the phone. Later, as Noah dozed under the influence of pain medication, David found Amelia in the hallway. She was on her own phone, her voice tight. "Yes, I understand I missed my shift. It was a family emergency. No, I understand. Yes, thank you for the opportunity." She ended the call and pressed her fingers to her eyes. "They fired you," David said. It wasn't a question. "It's fine. I'll find another—" "No," David stepped closer. "You've done this alone for 8 years, carrying everything, sacrificing everything. I won't let you do it anymore." "David!" She looked up at him, and for a moment he saw the young accountant who had believed in his dreams for the company, who had seen past his ambition to something more. "Let me help," he said softly. "Not just with money, with everything." A nurse approached before Amelia could respond. "Mr. Clark." There's an urgent call at the nurse's station. Something about the London Stock Exchange. David looked at Amelia, at the exhaustion and pride and lingering fear in her eyes. Then he looked through the door at Noah, asleep in the hospital bed, and Ethan curled in a chair beside him, finally sketching again, drawing his brother not as the baseball star, but as a warrior with a battle-scarred arm. "Tell them," David said clearly, "that they can proceed without me. I'm exactly where I need to be." The headline in the Wall Street Journal read, "Clark Enterprises stock plummets as CEO goes AWOL during critical merger." David folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside, focusing instead on Noah's determined face as they worked through his physical therapy exercises in the penthouse living room. 10 more rotations," David encouraged, watching his son slowly move his healing arm. "Then we'll try the stress ball. Mr. Clark." Rebecca hovered in the doorway, tablet in hand. "The emergency board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Dad, you should go," Noah said, wincing slightly as he completed another rotation. "I can do this part alone." "No, you can't," Ethan piped up from his spot by the window where he was sketching the cityscape. "Remember what happened yesterday when you tried to sneak in extra exercises?" Noah shot his twin a betrayed look. "Tattletale." "Voice of reason," Ethan corrected primly, a phrase he'd clearly picked up from their mother. David smiled at their bickering, but his eyes strayed to the tablet Rebecca held. The financial damage from the collapsed merger was worse than expected. Major shareholders were demanding explanations, and the board was threatening a vote of no confidence. "The meeting can proceed without me," he told Rebecca. "Send my proxy statement. I trust you to handle it." She nodded, but lingered. "Sir, they're saying they might try to force you out." "Let them try," David said quietly, turning back to Noah. "Now, about that stress ball." The elevator chimed, and Amelia stepped out, still slightly hesitant despite David's insistence that she use his private entrance. She carried a bag from the pharmacy and wore a new blazer, her first day at her new job at a small accounting firm, arranged through David's connections, but earned entirely on her own merit. "How's our patient?" she asked, setting down the bag. "Dad's teaching me to throw left-handed," Noah announced. "Watch!" He demonstrated his wobbly attempt at a pitch, sending the stress ball flying toward one of David's abstract paintings. David caught it smoothly. He'd had plenty of practice over the past week. "Impressive," Amelia said, but David noticed the worry in her eyes as she glanced at the newspaper. "David, can we talk?" In the kitchen, safely out of earshot, Amelia turned to him. "I saw the stock prices, David. You can't just abandon everything you've built. The boys would understand if you needed to—" "No." David leaned against the marble counter. "Do you know what I was doing 8 years ago? The day they were born?" Amelia blinked at the sudden question. "I assume you were working." "I was in Tokyo, closing a deal to acquire a tech startup. It was worth $50 million, and I considered it one of my greatest achievements." He smiled bitterly. "I don't even remember the company's name now, but I missed my sons' first breath, their first steps, their first words. I won't miss anything else. But your company can survive without me, or it can't. Either way, I'm done letting the board dictate my priorities." He straightened up. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." "Oh?" "I'm stepping down as CEO." Amelia's eyes widened. "David, no. I'm not leaving the company entirely. I'll remain as chairman, focusing on long-term strategy, but the day-to-day operations—" He shrugged. It's time for a change. The board will fight you on this." "Let them. I still own controlling interest." He paused, watching her face carefully. "There's something else. I've been looking at houses. Houses in Cambridge, near the boys' school, 3 stories, with a yard. Ethan could have a proper art studio, and there's space for a batting cage for Noah. It's only 10 minutes from your apartment." Amelia's breath caught. "David!" A crash from the living room interrupted them, followed by twin voices exclaiming, "It wasn't me!" They rushed back to find one of David's expensive vases in pieces on the floor, both boys pointing accusingly at each other while Rebecca tried to mediate. "The stress ball bounced," Noah protested. "Because you threw it too hard," Ethan countered. "Boys," Amelia started, but David held up a hand. "Oh, it's just a vase," he said, surprising himself with how little he cared about the 5-figure price tag. "But maybe this is a sign we need a more child-friendly space, somewhere with fewer breakables and more room for stress balls to bounce." He caught Amelia's eye, and something passed between them, a shared understanding, a glimpse of possibilities neither had dared consider before. The elevator chimed again. Vernon Matthews strode out, red-faced and brandishing a stack of papers. "David, this is insanity. The shareholders are in revolt, the merger is dead, and you're here playing nursemaid." David felt his sons shift closer to him, while Amelia stiffened beside them. The old David would have retreated to his office, would have prioritized damage control and market perception. Instead, he placed a hand on each twin's shoulder. "Vernon, meet my sons properly. Ethan, Noah, this is Mr. Matthews. He taught me everything I know about business." David smiled. "But you boys are teaching me something far more valuable." "And what's that?" Vernon demanded. "That success isn't measured in stock prices." David gestured to the broken vase, the scattered papers, the stress ball rolling under an antique side table. "Look around, Vernon. My perfect controlled life. It needed breaking. Now I'm building something better." "The board meeting starts in 5 minutes, Vernon said stiffly. "Then you'd better hurry. Give them my message. I'm restructuring my role. Effective immediately. If they don't like it—" David shrugged. "Well, I hear Rochester Corp is hiring." After Vernon left, silence fell over the penthouse. Then Noah picked up the stress ball and offered it to David. "Can we practice more? I think I'm getting better with my left hand." "Of course." David caught Amelia's eye again. "Actually, how about we all get out of here? There's a house in Cambridge I'd like you all to see. It has this amazing backyard." As they rode the elevator down, David's phone buzzed with market alerts and angry messages. He ignored them, focusing instead on Ethan's excited questions about the art studio, Noah's plans for the batting cage, and Amelia's quiet presence beside him. His perfect, ordered world was falling apart, and for the first time in his life, David Clark couldn't wait to see what would rise from the pieces. The Victorian house on Brattle Street stood 3 stories tall, its red brick facade softened by climbing ivy and morning light. David watched Ethan and Noah race up the front steps, their excited voices echoing across the wraparound porch. Behind him, Amelia stood motionless, staring at the house with an unreadable expression. "It's too much," she said quietly. "It's perfect," David countered, noting how the emerald shutters matched the color Ethan always chose for trees in his drawings. "And just wait until you see inside." The real estate agent, a polished woman named Lauren, unlocked the heavy wooden door. The boys burst in, their footsteps thundering across hardwood floors as they explored. David held back, watching Amelia's face as she took in the entryway's soaring ceiling, the grand staircase, the light streaming through stained glass windows. "The house was built in 1890, Lauren began her practiced speech, but David wasn't listening. He was watching Noah discover the window seat in the library, already imagining himself reading there during his recovery. Watching Ethan trail his fingers along the wood paneling, his artist's eye taking in every detail. "Dad!" Ethan called from upstairs. "Come see! There's a room with huge windows!" David glanced at Amelia, who nodded slightly. He took the stairs 2 at a time, following his son's voice to a 3rd-floor space flooded with natural light. Ethan stood in the center, spinning slowly, his face alight with possibility. "It's perfect for painting," he breathed. "The light is just like in those pictures of Monet's studio we saw at the museum. Is this where my batting cage goes?" Noah appeared in the doorway, his healing arm held carefully at his side. "This," David said, "would be Ethan's studio. Your batting cage would go in the backyard, behind the garden. We get a garden too. Amelia's voice came from behind them, soft but firm. We haven't decided anything yet. The boys' faces fell, and David felt something twist in his chest. He followed Amelia back downstairs, leaving the twins to explore further. In the kitchen, a warm space with exposed beams and a breakfast nook bathed in morning light, she turned to face him. David, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but it's too grand, too expensive, too much change, too fast. I know it's a big step, he admitted, but Amelia, look at them, listen. Above them, they could hear the boys' footsteps and excited voices as they discovered each new room. Noah was already planning where his baseball trophies would go, while Ethan debated paint colors for his studio. They're already home, David said softly. Amelia wrapped her arms around herself. And what happens when you change your mind, when the board forces you out, or you realize you miss your old life? The boys are finally letting themselves believe in you, David. I can't watch them lose that. Come with me, he said suddenly. Taking her hand, he led her through the house to a small room off the kitchen. Morning glory vines framed the window, and built-in shelves lined one wall. Would you know what I saw when I first found this room? Amelia shook her head. You were working on your accounting books at that window, finally having a quiet space of your own, after 8 years of trying to do everything from your kitchen table. He squeezed her hand. I'm not just buying a house, Amelia. I'm investing in our future, all of us. David! A crash from above interrupted them, followed by twin voices shouting, Sorry! David laughed. That's the third thing they've broken this week. My penthouse isn't exactly child-proof. Neither is this house, Amelia pointed out, but he caught the hint of a smile. No, but here they'd have space to be kids. Real grass stains instead of concrete scrapes, trees to climb instead of elevator buttons to push, and he hesitated. And maybe their parents could have dinner together sometimes, in that breakfast nook. Talk about their days, plan their future. Amelia's breath caught. Parents. I'm not proposing, David said quickly. Not yet. We have a lot to figure out first. But Amelia, he gestured around them, this could be a home, a real one. Not just for the boys, but for all of us. Before she could respond, Noah's voice echoed down the stairs. Mom, Dad, there's a treehouse in the backyard. They found the boys in the garden, staring up at an old oak tree that spread its branches protectively over a weathered wooden structure. The treehouse had clearly seen better days, its paint peeling and one window slightly crooked. It needs work, David admitted. We could fix it together, Noah suggested, like a family project. I could paint it, Ethan added. Make it match the house. David watched Amelia's face as she looked between the broken treehouse and their son's hopeful expressions. He recognized the emotion in her eyes, the same fear and longing he'd felt when he first heard the twins call him Dad. The commute would be longer, she said slowly, to my new job. I could drive you, David offered, or we could look at houses closer to... No, Amelia smiled finally, really smiled. This one. It feels right. But David, I insist on paying rent, something reasonable. Mom, both boys protested. We can discuss terms, David said diplomatically, his heart soaring. Maybe we start with you letting me fix up that treehouse without arguing about the cost. Amelia laughed, a free, joyful sound that made the boys stare in surprise. Okay, but I'm helping with the repairs. I'm pretty good with a hammer. Remember when you fixed our kitchen sink? Noah asked proudly. And the bathroom door, Ethan added. And my heart, David said quietly, so only Amelia could hear. She blushed, but didn't pull away when he took her hand again. Above them, a breeze stirred the oak's leaves, dappling the sunlight across their faces. The boys had already scrambled up to inspect the treehouse, their chatter mixing with birdsong and distant church bells. Lauren! David called to the realtor, who had been tactfully keeping her distance. We'll take it. David, Amelia warned, but he shook his head. We'll take it, he repeated firmly, as is full asking price. Immediate closing. He looked at Amelia. Sometimes, when you find the right home, you just know. She squeezed his hand, and he understood that she wasn't just talking about the house when she whispered, "Yes, sometimes you do." The moving van arrived on a crisp Saturday morning, pulling up to the Victorian house just as the first autumn leaves began to fall. David stood on the wraparound porch, watching the parade of boxes and furniture with an odd sense of unreality. His entire penthouse life, carefully curated over decades, was being carried past him in labeled containers: living room, art, office, awards, master bedroom, suits. "Where do you want the baseball trophies?" a mover called from the truck, holding up a cardboard box covered in Noah's distinctive scrawl. "Second floor, third bedroom on the right," David answered automatically. He'd memorized the boys' preferences during their excited planning sessions. Noah wanted the room overlooking the future batting cage, while Ethan had claimed the smaller space adjacent to his third-floor studio. "You look lost." Amelia's voice came from behind him. She carried a box labeled Kitchen Memories from her apartment, and David caught a glimpse of worn recipe cards and faded children's drawings inside. "Not lost," he said, "just realizing how much of my old life doesn't belong here." As if to emphasize his point, two movers struggled past with his massive mahogany desk, a symbol of corporate power that would look absurdly out of place in the warm, light-filled study off the library. "We can store anything that doesn't fit," Amelia offered, but David shook his head. "No, it's time for change." He took her box, their fingers brushing. Besides, I think your memories will fill this house better than my furniture ever could." A crash from inside made them both wince. They found Noah and Ethan in the kitchen, surrounded by the remains of what had once been David's crystal whiskey decanter. "Sorry," Noah blurted. "I was just showing Ethan how I can throw left-handed now, and—" Inside the house, Amelia's voice held the weary tone of a mother who had dealt with 8 years of similar explanations. "It's fine," David said, surprising himself. In fact, he surveyed his imported crystal collection, still packed in its crate. "I think these belong in my office at Clark Tower. This house needs more durable glassware." "Like the plastic cups we use?" Ethan asked innocently. "Exactly like those." David began lifting crystal glasses back into their crate. "Sometimes the expensive things aren't the most valuable." He caught Amelia watching him with an unreadable expression. Before he could decipher it, his phone buzzed. Rebecca, with updates about the board's latest maneuvers. They were still fighting his decision to step back, threatening legal action over his proposed restructuring. "Go," Amelia said softly. "Handle what you need to. We've got this here." David hesitated. "The boys were going to help me fix the treehouse this afternoon. I promised, and you'll be back for that," she said firmly. "We're not going anywhere, David. Some things just take time." He understood she wasn't just talking about the move. The drive to Clark Tower felt strange now, the familiar route leading to a place that no longer felt like home. In his office, Rebecca waited with a stack of papers and a concerned expression. "The board has called another emergency meeting," she began, but David held up a hand. "In a moment. First, help me with these." He began lifting his crystal collection onto his desk. "These belong here now, along with—" He glanced around his office, seeing it with new eyes. The abstract paintings, the awards, all the trappings of David Clark, CEO. "Sir, my new home doesn't need these things," he explained, carefully placing each crystal glass. "It needs plastic cups that won't shatter when hit with stray baseballs, children's drawings on the walls, recipe cards in the kitchen." Rebecca's expression softened. "The board won't understand that." "No," David agreed, "but I finally do." The emergency board meeting was exactly as contentious as he'd expected. Vernon led the charge, presenting charts showing the company's declining stock price, the lost merger opportunities, the whispers of instability in the financial press. "This isn't just about you anymore, David," Vernon insisted. "Thousands of jobs are at stake. retirement funds, families depending on Clark Enterprises, stability. You're right, David said calmly. It isn't about me. It's about legacy. He stood, approaching the screen where Vernon's charts glowed red with warning. For years, I thought legacy meant stock prices and market share. But real legacy, that's about the lives we touch, the people we help grow. He pulled up a different image, Ethan's drawing of Clark Tower, with its warm colors and signs of life. My son drew this. He saw what I couldn't, that this company shouldn't just be a monument to profit. It should be a force for positive change. Pretty pictures won't satisfy shareholders, Vernon scoffed. No, David agreed, but this will. He nodded to Rebecca, who distributed new folders to the board. My complete restructuring plan, not just for my role, but for the company's entire approach to work-life balance, flexible schedules, on-site childcare, support for working parents, real investment in our employees' families, not just their productivity. This is corporate suicide, Vernon sputtered. This is evolution, David smiled. And if you don't like it, I still own controlling interest. You can either help build this new vision, or you can leave. There's a tree house waiting for me to help fix it, and I won't miss another promise to my children. He left them arguing over the proposals, driving back to Brattle Street with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. The setting sun painted the old Victorian's windows gold, and he could hear laughter from the backyard. He found his family, and the word felt right now, gathered around the treehouse. Noah was attempting to hammer a nail one-handed, while Ethan critiqued his technique. Amelia sat cross-legged on the grass, sorting through lumber and consulting a repair manual. "You're just in time," she called. "We're about to start on the roof." "Perfect timing," David agreed, rolling up his sleeves. His $1,000 shirt would probably be ruined, and he couldn't care less. As the evening deepened into twilight, they worked together, measuring and sawing and planning. The treehouse slowly began to transform, much like the family building it. A little crooked, a little unconventional, but growing stronger with every carefully placed nail. "Dad," Ethan called from above, "I think I know what color we should paint it." "Oh?" "The same blue as the morning glories by Mum's window. So it looks like it grew right out of the garden." David met Amelia's eyes in the gathering dusk. "I think that's perfect," he said softly. "Absolutely perfect." Patricia Walsh hadn't changed much in 8 years. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair and measured smile were exactly as David remembered when she appeared in his Clark Tower office, a manila envelope clutched in her manicured hands. "I saw the news about your family situation," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I felt I should come forward." David's fingers tightened on his pen. "About the messages you blocked. About why I blocked them." She placed the envelope on his desk. "Amelia Miller wasn't the first woman to claim you had fathered her child. There were others, 3 to be exact, during my time as your assistant, all trying to exploit your success." David's world tilted slightly. "What? I handled them, of course. Investigations proved they were lying. When Miss Miller's messages started coming, I assumed—" Patricia shrugged. "I was protecting you, David, like I always did." David stared at the envelope. "What's in there?" "Copies of everything, the other claims, the investigations, and," she hesitated, "Miss Miller's original messages, including one where she offered to stay quiet for a price." The autumn sunlight streaming through his office window suddenly felt cold. David opened the envelope with unsteady hands, scanning documents that painted a very different picture of the past 8 years. Among the papers was a letter in Amelia's handwriting, dated 7 years ago, requesting a substantial payment in exchange for her silence about the twins. "But why show me this now?" Patricia's smile turned sympathetic. "Because you're giving up everything for them. The board is worried, shareholders are fleeing, and your reputation—" She leaned forward. "I care about you, David. I couldn't let you destroy yourself without knowing everything." David's phone buzzed. A text from Amelia with a photo of the boys at their newly repaired treehouse, now painted the exact shade of morning glory blue. They were grinning, faces smudged with paint, looking so much like him it hurt. "Have these been verified?" he asked quietly. The other claims were thoroughly investigated. As for Ms. Miller's letter, Patricia stood. "I'll let you draw your own conclusions, but the David Clark I knew would never let emotion cloud his judgment." After she left, David sat motionless, staring at the documents scattered across his desk. The other claims were clearly false. Investigations had proven that conclusively. But Amelia's letter... He was still sitting there when Rebecca entered an hour later. "Sir, you're going to be late for Noah's physical therapy appointment." David looked up, his voice hollow. "What do you know about Patricia Walsh's time here?" Rebecca frowned. "Not much. She was very protective of you. Some said too protective." She hesitated. "And there were rumors she sometimes went too far, made decisions without consulting you. That's why the board suggested her retirement. Find out everything you can about her handling of personal matters during her tenure. And Rebecca," David stood, gathering the papers, "don't tell anyone about this, especially not Amelia." The drive to the physical therapy clinic was a blur. David watched through the window as Noah worked with his therapist, his right arm growing stronger each day. Ethan sat nearby, as always, sketching his brother's exercises in his ever-present notebook. "He's making excellent progress," the therapist reported. "Another month, and he should be ready for light pitching practice." "Dad, can we work on it in the backyard?" Noah asked eagerly. "I've been practicing my grip like you showed me." David forced a smile, but his mind was racing. Had it all been a lie? The struggling single mother, the reluctance to ask for help, the careful pride in maintaining her independence. Was this all an elaborate scheme that had finally paid off? "Earth to Dad," Ethan waved his sketchbook. "Look, I drew Noah's arm muscles. The therapist helped me get the anatomy right." David looked at the drawing, precise, detailed, filled with the same passion for accuracy he brought to his own architectural projects at that age. His own son, undeniably. The DNA test had confirmed it. But Amelia's letter, that evening, the Victorian house felt different. David watched Amelia move through the kitchen, helping the boys with homework while starting dinner, her movements easy and natural in the space that had become their home. Had she planned this all along? "David?" She caught him staring. "Everything okay?" He opened his mouth to confront her, to demand explanations about the letter, about the past. But Noah chose that moment to successfully solve a particularly tricky math problem, and Amelia's face lit up with genuine pride. "That's my boy," she said softly, kissing the top of Noah's head. "You're getting as good at math as your brother." "Am not," Noah grumbled, but he was smiling. "Are two," Ethan countered, not looking up from his sketch. David watched them, this family that had crashed into his perfectly ordered life and turned everything upside down. The letter in his briefcase felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. "I need to work late tomorrow," he found himself saying. "Board meeting." Oh, was that disappointment in Amelia's eyes? "But tomorrow is family dinner night." "I know. I'm sorry." The boys looked up, identical frowns creasing their foreheads. They'd been planning this dinner all week, their first real family meal in the formal dining room, celebrating 1 month in the new house. "But you promised," Noah said quietly. The word hit David like a physical blow. Promises. He'd been making so many lately, believing in this new life, this chance at redemption. But if it was built on lies, sometimes promises have to be broken, he said, and immediately regretted it as hurt flickered across 3 faces. "Like when you didn't come to my art show last week?" Ethan's voice was small. "Or my therapy session on Thursday," Noah added. "Boys," Amelia warned, but David heard the question in her voice too. He'd been pulling back lately, missing moments, retreating into work as the weight of Patricia's revelations pressed down on him. "I'm doing my best," he said stiffly. "Are you?" Amelia's eyes met his, and for a moment he saw the young accountant who had believed in his dreams, who had seen through his corporate armor to something more. Unless that had been a lie too. "I have to go," he said abruptly, grabbing his briefcase. "Early meeting tomorrow." He fled to his car, Patricia's envelope burning against his chest where he'd transferred it for safekeeping. As he drove away, he caught a glimpse of his family in the warm kitchen window, Amelia holding both boys close, their faces confused and hurt. The David Clark he used to be would have demanded answers, would have confronted the problem head-on with corporate efficiency. But that David had never had so much to lose. Tomorrow, he told himself, tomorrow he would ask about the letter. Tomorrow he would understand why the woman he was growing to love might have tried to blackmail him 7 years ago. Tonight, he just drove, watching his rearview mirror until the house disappeared into the gathering dark. The letter sat between them on the kitchen island like a live grenade, Amelia's handwriting stark against the yellowed paper in the late evening light. The boys were asleep upstairs, their soft breathing audible through the old house's heating vents, unaware that their world was about to shatter. "I don't understand," Amelia whispered, her fingers trembling as she touched the signature at the bottom of the page. "I never wrote this." "It's your handwriting," David said flatly. The past week of doubt and distance had hollowed him out, leaving only the businessman who had survived countless betrayals. Patricia had it in her files, along with evidence of other women who tried to exploit me. "Was that your plan all along?" "David, no." Amelia's voice cracked. "This isn't. I would never." "Then explain it." His voice rose, and they both froze, listening for any sound from upstairs. When only silence followed, David continued more quietly. "Explain how your signature ended up on a letter demanding money for silence about the boys." Amelia sank onto a kitchen stool, her face pale. 7 years ago, I was desperate. Noah was sick, really sick. The hospital bills were overwhelming, and I was about to lose our apartment. She pressed her hands flat against the counter, steadying herself. "I did write to you then, through the company, but not asking for money. I wanted you to know your sons existed, to have the choice to be their father. And this," David tapped the letter, "this explicit threat to go to the media unless I paid you off. I never wrote that." Amelia's eyes flashed. "Yes, I wrote to you several times, but Patricia Walsh intercepted every message. She called me to her office once, told me to stay away, that she'd handle any reasonable compensation if I signed some papers." She laughed bitterly. I threw them back in her face and walked out. I would never sell my children's birthright. David wanted to believe her. The past months of family dinners, homework help, and treehouse repairs had shown him a woman of fierce integrity. "But the evidence—" "Rebecca's been investigating," he said slowly. "There were other claims during Patricia's time, all false, all handled quietly. But she also found complaints about Patricia overstepping, making decisions without authorization, falsifying documents." Hope flickered in Amelia's eyes. "Then you believe me?" "I want to." David ran a hand through his hair. "But Amelia, if I'm wrong, I've given up everything for this family. My reputation, my company's stability, my whole life's work. If this has all been some elaborate— Dad!" They both turned to find Ethan in the doorway, clutching his sketchbook, Noah right behind him. The boys had identical expressions of fear on their faces, expressions David recognized from his own childhood, watching his parents' marriage crumble under the weight of secrets and mistrust. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Noah's voice was small. "Like you've been leaving all week, missing dinner and homework, and no one's leaving," Amelia started. But Ethan cut her off. "We're not stupid, Mom. We've seen this before, with other people who said they wanted to be our dad. They always leave when things get hard." The words hit David like a physical blow. "Other people. Mom never told them about you," Noah said quickly. "They were just guys she dated sometimes. But they always left when they realized Mom wouldn't let them try to be our father, because she said—" He looked at his mother. "You said we already had a father, even if he didn't know about us yet." David turned to Amelia, who was crying silently. "Is that true?" "Ask Miss Rebecca," Ethan said suddenly. All 3 adults stared at him. "What?" "She told me she keeps really good records. She showed me her filing system last week when I was drawing in Dad's office. She said she has copies of everything Mom ever sent to the company. Everything? David asked sharply. Ethan nodded. She said she's been looking for some old letters, something about wanting to understand what happened before she worked there. David was already pulling out his phone, but Amelia's hand on his arm stopped him. David, wait. Before you make that call, look at this. She took Ethan's sketchbook gently. Show your father what you were working on, honey. Ethan hesitated, then opened to a page he'd clearly been laboring over for days. It was a portrait of their family. Not a child's simple drawing, but a carefully observed study. David stood in the center, one hand on each boy's shoulder, while Amelia sat in the garden nearby. The detail was extraordinary. The way Noah leaned slightly on his healing arm, the ink smudges on Ethan's fingers, the soft smile on Amelia's face as she watched them. I was going to give it to you at family dinner, Ethan mumbled, before you stopped coming. David stared at the drawing, at the family he'd been pulling away from out of fear. He saw now what he'd been missing all week, Noah's confused hurt when he missed physical therapy, Ethan's quiet withdrawal when he worked late, Amelia's careful dignity as she shouldered their pain alone. Again, his phone rang, making them all jump. Rebecca. Sir, she said without preamble, I found them. The original letters from Ms. Miller, dated 8 years ago. They were misfiled in Patricia's personal records. And, sir, there's something else. A memo from Patricia to her private file, detailing her plan to protect you from gold diggers, by any means necessary, including, Rebecca paused, including forging documents to discourage claims. David looked at his family, his real, true family, watching him with a mixture of hope and fear. He thought of his own father, who had let suspicion poison everything good in his life, who had died alone in his perfect penthouse, surrounded by wealth and achievements and nothing else. Rebecca, he said clearly, holding Amelia's gaze, I need you to send everything you've found to legal, and then call Patricia Walsh's lawyer. Tell them, he took a deep breath, tell them we'll be pressing charges for fraud and interference with parental rights. He ended the call and opened his arms. The boys crashed into him immediately, and after a moment's hesitation, Amelia joined them. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other as the truth settled around them like falling leaves. I'm sorry, David whispered into Ethan's hair. I'm so sorry I doubted. I promise. Don't, Amelia said softly. Don't promise never to doubt again. Just promise to talk to us when you do. We're stronger together, remember? David thought of the treehouse they'd rebuilt, the home they were making, the family they were becoming, imperfect and complicated and more precious than anything he'd ever achieved. Together, he agreed, and felt the last of his doubt fall away as his sons hugged him tighter and Amelia's hand found his in the gathering dark. 1 year to the day after the gala that had changed everything, David stood at a different podium in the same ballroom. The annual Clark Foundation Charity Gala looked markedly different this time. Children's artwork decorated the walls alongside the usual corporate logos, and the crowd included families of employees alongside Boston's elite. Welcome to the first annual Clark Family Foundation Night, David began, his voice carrying easily across the transformed space. Some of you may remember last year's event, when my life changed forever. He smiled at his sons, seated in the front row in matching suits, their ties slightly crooked despite Amelia's best efforts. 2 brave boys taught me that success isn't measured in stock prices or merger deals, but in the lives we touch and the family we build. In the audience, Vernon Matthews nodded approvingly. The past year had proven David right. Clark Enterprises' new family-friendly policies had attracted top talent, and their emphasis on work-life balance had become a model for other corporations. The stock price had not only recovered, but soared. Tonight's proceeds will establish the Patricia Walsh Accountability Initiative, David continued, watching his former assistant's lawyer shift uncomfortably in his seat. The settlement had been generous but firm. Patricia's confession and retirement in exchange for the foundation naming a program after her, one dedicated to helping single parents navigate corporate bureaucracy and advocate for their rights. But more importantly, David said, tonight we celebrate family in all its forms. The families we're born into, the families we create, and the families we find when we least expect them. His eyes found Amelia, beautiful in a midnight blue gown, her hand resting protectively on Noah's shoulder. And now, I'd like to invite my sons to help me make a special announcement. The twins bounded onto the stage, their excitement barely contained by their formal wear. Noah's right arm was fully healed. He'd pitched his team to victory in the championship game last month, with David and Ethan cheering from the stands and Amelia stress-baking enough cookies to feed the entire league. The Clark Foundation is launching a new project, Ethan announced proudly, unrolling an architectural rendering he'd helped design. The family centre at Clark Tower will provide childcare, after-school programs, and family support services for all employees. And a really cool playground on the roof, Noah added, making the audience laugh. Thank you, boys. David squeezed their shoulders. But there's one more announcement tonight, one that's just for our family. He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the small velvet box he'd been carrying for weeks. Amelia Miller, would you join us up here? Amelia's eyes widened as she made her way to the stage. The boys were practically vibrating with excitement. They'd helped him plan this moment, sworn to secrecy during countless conspiratorial treehouse meetings. 1 year ago, David said, taking her hand, you walked into this ballroom as part of the catering staff, carrying a secret that would change my life. Tonight, you walk in as the woman who taught me what really matters. He dropped to one knee, and the audience gasped collectively. You showed me how to be a father, how to build a home, how to love without reservation or fear. Will you show me how to be a husband too? Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks as he opened the box, revealing not a traditional diamond, but a ring designed by Ethan, a delicate band of white gold wrapped in morning glory vines, with 2 small sapphires, the exact shade of their sons' eyes. Our boys helped choose it, David said softly, just like they helped me choose love over fear, family over fortune, real happiness over empty success. Amelia Miller, will you marry me? Say yes, Mom. Both boys burst out in unison, making the audience laugh again. Amelia looked at her sons, their faces shining with joy and hope, and then at David, still kneeling before her with his heart in his eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes to everything. The ballroom erupted in applause as David slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss. The twins made exaggerated gagging noises before joining the embrace, turning it into a family group hug right there on stage. Later, as the party wound down, they stood on the ballroom's balcony watching the sunset paint the city gold. Noah and Ethan had loosened their ties and were sharing a plate of stolen desserts, arguing amicably about whether the family center playground should include a climbing wall. A penny for your thoughts, Amelia said, leaning into David's side. He looked at his family, really looked at them. At Noah, gesturing dramatically with a chocolate-covered strawberry as he made his case for the climbing wall. At Ethan, sketching playground designs on a napkin, his artistic talent now nurtured by proper lessons and endless encouragement. At Amelia, his fierce, loving partner, the ring on her finger catching the last rays of sunlight. I was thinking about patterns, he said finally, how easy it is to repeat them. My father let doubt poison his happiness. I almost did the same. But you didn't, Amelia reminded him. You chose to trust, to believe in us. In family, David agreed. He pulled her closer, watching their son's animated discussion. You know, the night you told me you were taking that accounting job instead of letting me support you, I was frustrated. I wanted to give you and the boys everything, but you taught me the most valuable things can't be bought. Like what? Like Sunday morning pancake disasters in our kitchen. Like the way Ethan's face lights up when he masters a new drawing technique, like watching Noah pitch with his whole heart, like falling asleep listening to this crazy, beautiful family breathing under one roof. He turned to face her. Like falling in love with my best friend. Dad! Noah called suddenly. Tell Ethan a climbing wall would be totally safe. Mom! Ethan countered. Tell Noah we need an art wall instead. David and Amelia exchanged glances, then spoke in perfect unison. Why not both? The boys' faces lit up as they began planning this new collaboration. Just as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared over Boston. 1 year ago, David had stood in this same spot, alone with his empire and his ambitions. Now he stood surrounded by love, by family, by everything that truly mattered. Outside the window, Clark Tower rose against the darkening sky, no longer a monument to corporate success, but a beacon of change, of growth, of second chances. Just like the morning glories blooming in their garden, some things had to break through hard ground to find the light. But with love, with trust, with family by your side, anything was possible, even happily ever after. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.